this one we are going to read from the study material and our chapter that we are going to discuss, that is the insolvency and bankruptcy code, that is 2016. Earlier we have read this chapter from Shubham Singhal sir notes as well, but हम study material को तो कभी भी skip करने को सोच नहीं सकते because ultimately question तो study material से ही आने वाले हैं. तो वो अंडरस्टैंडिंग के लिए हमने पढ़ लिए थे, बट करंटली our emphasis will be from study material. तो द इंसॉल्वेंसी एंड द बैंक्रप्सी कोड 2016 किस बारे में बात करता है? एट द एंड ऑफ दिस चैप्टर you will be able to explain the concepts of insolvency and bankruptcy code 2016. हम क्या बोलते हैं? at the end of this chapter के end में, आखिर में जाके you and me, we all student will be able to explain the concepts of insolvency and bankruptcy code 2016. उसके बाद why it is called? because बहुत सारे acts जो subsumed हो जाते हैं, when बहुत सारे acts जब subsume हो जाते हैं तो वो code बन जाता है, तो that is same is to be treated as code. Explain the concepts of insolvency and bankruptcy code 2016 code. We need to explain the relationship between bankruptcy, insolvency and liquidation. ये सारी चीजें हमें बतानी है. Then we need to explain the important terminology used in the code. What will be the important terminologies जो कि use की जाएगी in the code में? Then we need to identify the structure and applicability of code. फिर हमें identify करना होगा what will be the structure and applicability of the code. We will be able to elaborate the manner and process of insolvency resolution process for corporate person. Then आता है हमारा introduction, that is the concept of insolvency and the bankruptcy. The term insolvency is used for both individual and organization. जो term है insolvency का, उसे यूज किया जाता है फॉर बहुत इंडिविजुअल्स के लिए भी एज वेल एज ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस के लिए भी. इंसॉल्वेंसी इज व्हेन देयर इज अ डिफॉल्ट इन अ पेमेंट एंड इट इज नॉट पेड. इंसॉल्वेंसी कब बोलते हैं हम? इज व्हेन देयर इज अ डिफॉल्ट. जब क्या हो कि हम बोले देयर इज अ डिफॉल्ट, पेमेंट में डिफॉल्ट हो गया हो एंड इट इज नॉट पेड, और उसको पे नहीं किया गया हो. डिफॉल्ट इज डिफाइंड अंडर सेक्शन 3 क्लोज 12 of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016. Untreated insolvency will lead to bankruptcy for non-corporate and liquidation of corporates. Creditor put money into debt investment today in investment. हम क्या बोलते हैं? Creditor put money into debt. Creditors जो होते हैं वो put money into debt investment today in return for the promise of fixed future cash flow. But the return expected on this investment are still uncertain because at the time of repayment, the corporate or individual debtor may make repayment as promised, or he may default and does not make the payment. When default happens in payment, the debtor is considered insolvent. तो debtor जो है वो pay नहीं कर पाया when the time occurs, or when the actually the situation happens when asking for the payment, and जो debtor है वो consider मतलब इनकेपेसिटी हो गया हो उसका पेमेंट के लिए, तो दैट विल बी कंसिडर्ड एज इंसॉल्वेंट. The debtor may be insolvent because of the financial failure, a persistent mismatch between the payment by the enterprise and receivable into the enterprise, even though the business model is generating revenues. और तो हम क्या बोलते हैं? that when there will be the financial failure कब हो जाएगा? a persistent mismatch हो जाए between the payment by the enterprise and the receivable into the enterprise. when we will treat it as a financial failure, a persistent mismatch हो जाए, अगर कोई persistent mismatch हो जाए between the payments by the enterprise, जो भी payments हो रहे by the enterprise, and receivable into the enterprise, even though the business model is generating revenues, or business failures which is a breakdown in the business model of the enterprise and it is unable to generate sufficient revenues to meet the payment, or there may be avoidance of transaction because of which also insolvency may be happen. Then comes this definition that term insolvency can be used for individuals के लिए भी और organization corporates के लिए भी use करते हैं. individual के लिए हम insolvency तो दोनों के लिए use किया जा सकता है. individual के लिए हम बोलते हैं bankruptcy. organization corporate insolvency के लिए हम क्या further term use कर रहे हैं? state when individual or company default in making payment and the value of asset held by them are less than the liability. if untreated insolvency it will lead to, for non corporate के लिए तो bankruptcy है, और कंपनी जो इंसॉल्वेंट होती है तो हम बोलते हैं वो लिक्विडेशन में जा रही है. उसके बाद फर्दर जो है द रिपोर्ट ऑफ बैंक्रप्सी लॉ रिफॉर्म कमिटी वॉल्यूम रैशनल एंड डिजाइन नवंबर दिस। तो फ्रॉम द अबाउ इट इज एविडेंट है, हम क्या बोलते हैं दैट फ्रॉम द अबाउ इट इज एविडेंट दैट इंसॉल्वेंसी इज अ स्टेट एंड बैंक्रप्सी इज अ कंक्लूजन। इंसॉल्वेंसी एक ऐसी स्थिति है और बैंक्रप्सी तो एक कंक्लूजन है। A bankrupt would be conclusive insolvent where all the insolvencies will not lead to bankruptcy. Insolvency situation can be resolved through resolution mechanism under the code, and a failed resolution mechanism would lead to liquidation process in relation to corporates and bankruptcy process in relation to individual under the code. Then comes the avoidance transaction. It is covered in Chapter 3 of IBC 2016. The relevant provisions are in the following sections. There will be the preferential transactions हो सकता है section 43 and 44, undervalue transactions section 45 to 48, transaction defrauding creditors section 49, extortionate credit transaction section 50 and 51. There is also हो सकता है provision for fraudulent trading or wrongful trading section 66 and section 67. उसके बाद the IRP RP liquidator has to form an opinion, then determine the avoidance transaction and thereafter file the petition before the honorable NCLT. Under the above provision against the preparators, there are timelines prescribed for all the activities under regulation. However, the times are not mandatory as per the NCLT. जो एनक्लेट है in the matter of Prashant Chandra Rat suspended the directors of corporate debtor versus the Suryakanta Satapathy RP company appeal insolvency number this and company appeal in order has decided that the CIRP regulation 35A is not mandatory and the requirement for approaching the adjudicating authority for appropriate relief on or before the 135th day of insolvency commencement date is only directory. तो इसमें क्या था जो एनक्लेट है इन द मैटर, ये जो पर्टिकुलर केस था प्रशांत चंद्र राठ वर्सेस सूर्य इन दिस इंसॉल्वेंसी कंपनी अपील, दिस हैज डिसाइडेड दैट जो सीआरपी की रेगुलेशन है 35A इज नॉट, वो मैंडेटरी नहीं है, और जो रिक्वायरमेंट है फॉर अप्रोचिंग द एडजुडिकेटिंग अथॉरिटी फॉर अप्रोप्रिएट रिलीफ ऑन एंड बिफोर 135th डे ऑफ इंसॉल्वेंसी कमिंसिंग डेट इज ओनली डायरेक्टरी है। उसके बाद व्हाट विल बी द रिलेशनशिप, क्या होगा बिटवीन बैंक्रप्सी में, इंसॉल्वेंसी एंड लिक्विडेशन में। तो व्हाट विल बी द रिलेशनशिप, किसके बीच में रिलेशनशिप क्या होगा बैंक्रप्सी, इंसॉल्वेंसी और लिक्विडेशन के बीच का। In lucid language, if any person or entity is unable to pay off the debt and it owes to their creditors on time or as and when they become due and payable, and if default, then such person or entity is regarded as insolvent. तो उस केस में क्या कहा जाएगा, insolvent. Bankruptcy एक legal proceeding से involving a persons or business that is unable to repay outstanding debts. Bankruptcy जो है वो एक legal proceedings है involving a person, जिसमें क्या involve होता है, एक person होगा, business होगा, that is unable to repay, we are in not in a situation to repay, हम outstanding पैसा नहीं दे पा रहे हैं। टू रीपे मतलब सारा पैसा ले लिया है हमने, फर्दर इन्वेस्ट भी कर दिया, व्हेन द टाइम अकर्स और व्हेन द सिचुएशन हैपेंस, व्हेन द ऑब्लिगेशन अराइजेस टू रीपे इट बैक, हम नहीं पे कर पा रहे, टू रीपे आउटस्टैंडिंग डेट। The bankruptcy process began with petition filed by the debtor or by the creditor. All of the debtors' assets are measured and evaluated, and the assets may be used to repay a portion of outstanding debt. Then comes the liquidation. Liquidation क्या है, liquidation जो है वो कंपनी जो है डूब चुकी है तब इस्तेमाल किया जा रहा है, that liquidation situations हो गई है जब कॉर्पोरेट के पास पैसा नहीं है देने को, रिटर्न बैक। Liquidation is the winding up of a corporation or incorporated entity. There may be many persons that can initiate proceedings to cause the liquidation, those being the regulatory bodies, the directors of a company, the shareholders of the company, and unpaid creditors of a company. In a nutshell, insolvency is common to both bankruptcy and liquidation. Not being able to pay debts as and when they become due and payable are the leading cause of liquidation and is the only way that can cause a natural person to become a bankrupt. Objectives क्या, sound legal framework of insolvency law was required for achieving the following objective. Then comes the improved handling of conflicts between the creditors and the debtor. हम क्या बोलते हैं, that will be what, that will be the improved handling of conflicts between the creditor and the debtor. It can provide procedural certainty about the process of negotiation in such a way as to reduce the problems of common property and reduce information asymmetry for all the economic participants. तो हम क्या बोल रहे हैं, what will be the objective? एक sound legal framework of insolvency law was required. एक sound legal framework की जरूरत होगी. A sound legal framework of insolvency law was required for achieving the following objective. Firstly, what you need to recap, that is improve handling of conflicts between the creditors and the debtor. What we need to do is improve handling of conflicts. हमें handle करना होगा जो भी झगड़े होने वाले हैं between the creditor and debtors के बीच में. तो objectives क्या है, एक sound legal. तो हम क्या पढ़ रहे हैं कि ये सारा insolvency और ये सारी situations जो होती है, एक sound legal framework of insolvency law was required for achieving the following objectives को, एक साउंड लीगल फ्रेमवर्क ऑफ इंसॉल्वेंसी लॉ की जरूरत है ताकि हम अचीव कर पाए ये फॉलोइंग ऑब्जेक्टिव्स को. जैसे कि इंप्रूव, कैसे हम जो झगड़े होने वाले हैं क्रेडिटर एंड डेटर के बीच में कैसे हम उसको सॉर्ट आउट करने वाले हैं. इट कैन प्रोवाइड प्रोसीजरल सर्टेनिटी अबाउट द प्रोसेस ऑफ नेगोशिएशन इन सच अ वे टू रिड्यूस प्रॉब्लम्स ऑफ कॉमन प्रॉपर्टी एंड रिड्यूस इंफॉर्मेशन असिमेट्री फॉर ऑल इकोनॉमिक पार्टिसिपेंट्स. हम क्या बोलते हैं, हमें इंप्रूव करना है जो भी कन्फ्लिक्ट्स हो रहे हैं उसे हमें इंप्रूव करना है, जो भी क्रेडिटर और डेटर के बीच में जो कन्फ्लिक्ट्स हो रहे हैं उसे हमें इंप्रूव करना है. इट कैन प्रोवाइड प्रोसीजरल सर्टेनिटी, प्रोवाइड करती है अबाउट द प्रोसेस ऑफ नेगोशिएशन इन सच अ वे एज टू रिड्यूस द प्रॉब्लम्स ऑफ, ताकि हम जो ये प्रॉब्लम्स है कॉमन प्रॉपर्टी एंड रिड्यूस इंफॉर्मेशन असिमेट्री ऑफ फॉर ऑल इकोनॉमिक पार्टिसिपेंट, और जो ये इनसफिशिएंट इंफॉर्मेशन एसिमेट्री, इंफॉर्मेशन एसिमेट्री फॉर ऑल इकोनॉमिक पार्टिसिपेंट्स के लिए. मतलब क्या ऑब्जेक्टिव्स है, एक ऐसा लो की जरूरत क्यों है, तो इन सारी प्रॉब्लम्स को सॉर्ट आउट करने के लिए. अवॉइड डिस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ वैल्यू, हमें अवॉइड करना होगा डिस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ वैल्यू. इट कैन ऑल्सो प्रोवाइड फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी फॉर पार्टीज टू अराइव एट द मोस्ट एफिशिएंट सॉल्यूशन टू मैक्सिमाइज द वैल्यू ड्यूरिंग नेगोशिएशंस. द इंसॉल्वेंसी लॉ विल क्रिएट अ प्लेटफॉर्म फॉर नेगोशिएशन बिटवीन द क्रेडिटर्स एंड एक्सटर्नल इन्वेस्टर्स विच कैन क्रिएट करेगा द पॉसिबिलिटी ऑफ सच रीअरेंजमेंट्स. उसके बाद ड्रॉइंग द लाइन बिटवीन malfeasance and business failures. If malfeasance, then promoter should be held responsible. If business fails, then the company should move forward for its resolution. So drawing the line between malfeasance and business failures क्या बोलता है, malfeasance then promoter should be held responsible होते हैं. If business fails, then the company should move forward for its resolution. The recommendation of the Bankruptcy Law Reforms Committee BLRC lead to the enactment of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016 IBC और कोड ऑन 28 May 2016. So insolvency bankruptcy code है consolidating all the existing insolvency related laws has brought about a revolutionary change in a form of a robust, modern and sophisticated insolvency framework. ये जो framework है that the same seeks to achieve a resolution for corporate debtors in distress and feeling that their liquidation in a time bound manner. Prior to the IBC, the legislative framework for insolvency and restructuring was fragmented across multiple legislation such as the Companies Act 2013, the SIC Industrial Companies Special Provision Act 1985, Securitization and Reconstruction of Financial Assets and Enforcement of Security Interest Act 2002, the Recovery of Debts due to the Bank and Financial Institution Act RDDB जो भी है ये, and the Presidency Towns Insolvency Act 1909 and the Provisional Insolvency Act 1920. तो अलग अलग एक्ट दे रखे हैं. Companies Act we all people know, that is Companies Act 2013. Companies Act 2013 है. सिक इंडस्ट्रियल कंपनीज स्पेशल प्रोविजन एक्ट 1985, सिक्योरिटाइजेशन एंड रिकंस्ट्रक्शन ऑफ फाइनेंशियल एसेट्स एंड सरफासी दैट इज 2002. सरफासी इज 2002. 1985 दैट इज समथिंग रिलेटेड टू सिक इंडस्ट्रियल, वो सारा है. रिकवरी ऑफ डेट ड्यू टू बैंक एंड दिस is 1993, the Presidency Downs Insolvency 1909 and the Provisional Insolvency Act 1920. Preamble of the code, objectives of the code are given in the preamble. An act to consolidate, कैसे हम consolidate करें, amend करें the laws जो कि relating है to the reorganization and insolvency resolution of corporate person, partnership firms and individuals in a time bound manner for maximization of value of assets of such persons to promote entrepreneurship. अवेलेबिलिटी ऑफ क्रेडिट, ये सारी चीजें हमें देखनी होगी. व्हाट विल बी द बैलेंस ऑफ इंटरेस्ट ऑफ ऑल द स्टेक होल्डर्स इंक्लूडिंग द ऑल्ट्रेशन इन द ऑर्डर ऑफ प्रायोरिटी ऑफ पेमेंट ऑफ गवर्नमेंट ड्यूज. कैसे हम एस्टेब्लिश करेंगे एन इंसॉल्वेंसी एंड बैंक्रप्सी बोर्ड ऑफ इंडिया एंड फॉर मैटर्स कनेक्टेड देयर विद और इncidental thereto. आईबीसी जो इंसॉल्वेंसी बैंक्रप्सी कोड इज नॉट अ रिकवरी मैकेनिज्म नहीं है. एज पर द preamble, the objective of the insolvency bankruptcy code is resolution of the corporate debtor and it cannot be used as recovery mechanism. Then comes the cash flows that जो enclave है the company appeal insolvency this in the matter of Messrs Amson's Communication Private Limited has ordered that the provision of code cannot be allowed as a recovery mechanism or to recover the claim of interest by operational creditor. Then come the structure of the code. The code is structured into 5 parts comprising of 255 sections and 12 schedules. Each part deal करता है with the distinct aspects of the insolvency resolution process के साथ. So this is part contain chapters and section and chapter contain. So part contain will be the preliminary. Chapter and section 1 से 3 तक part 1. Chapter and contain short title, extent and commencement, application and definition. तो जैसे कि part है part 1, part contain में आएगा preliminary, chapters and section में 1 to 3 part 1, chapter contain में short title, extent and commencement, application, definition. उसके बाद part 2 में है insolvency resolution and liquidation for corporate person, 4 से लेकर 77 तक part 2, preliminary application and definitions, corporate insolvency resolution process, liquidation process, pre-package insolvency resolution process, fast track corporate insolvency resolution process, voluntary liquidation of corporate person, adjudicating authority for corporate person, offenses and penalty. Then comes the insolvency resolution and bankruptcy for individuals and 78 to 187. Then that's the part 3. Preliminary application and definitions क्या है, fresh start process क्या है, insolvency resolution process क्या है, bankruptcy order क्या है for individual and partnerships के लिए. पार्टनरशिप फॉर्म्स में क्या है, फॉर्म्स एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन एंड डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन ऑफ द स्टेट ऑफ द बैंकरप्ट, एडजुडिकेटिंग अथॉरिटी, ऑफेंसेस एंड पेनल्टीज, रेगुलेशन ऑफ इंसॉल्वेंसी प्रोफेशनल्स, एजेंसीज एंड इंफॉर्मेशन यूटिलिटीज 188 से 223 तक. पार्ट 4 द इंसॉल्वेंसी एंड बैंकरप्सी बोर्ड ऑफ इंडिया, पावर्स एंड फंक्शन ऑफ द बोर्ड, इंसॉल्वेंसी प्रोफेशनल एजेंसी, इंसॉल्वेंसी प्रोफेशनल्स, इंफॉर्मेशन यूटिलिटी, इंस्पेक्शन एंड इन्वेस्टिगेशन, फाइनेंस अकाउंट एंड ऑडिट. उसके बाद हमारा आता है मिसलेनियस 224 से 255, पार्ट 5 एंड मिसलेनियस. देन शेड्यूल 1 से लेके 12 तक. जो एक इंसॉल्वेंसी बैंक्रप्सी बोर्ड ऑफ इंडिया है दैट इज आईबीबीआई एस्टेब्लिश हुई है तो ताकि हम एडमिनिस्टर कर पाए द वर्क ऑफ इंसॉल्वेंसी एंड बैंक्रप्सी ऑफ कॉर्पोरेट पर्सन्स, फर्म्स एंड इंडिविजुअल. So Insolvency Bankruptcy Board of India is the regulator who regulates the main component of IBC ecosystem, that is insolvency professional agencies, insolvency professionals, registered valuers and information utilities. IPA is the second limb of regulator. What will be the foundation of code? Key innovation of the IBC is the 4 pillars institutional framework comprising the first pillar, the judicial adjudicating authority being the National Company Law Tribunal NCLT or adjudicating authority, where corporate insolvency matters shall be heard and the NCLT will be appellate authority. The second pillar, the regulator being Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, which has regulatory oversight over insolvency professionals and insolvency professional agencies. The third pillar and the class of regulated person being the insolvency professional who play a key role in the efficient working of insolvency and bankruptcy process under the IBC. And the fourth pillar, a new industry called information utilities to electronically store facts about the lenders and the terms of lending. तो जो की इनोवेशन है ऑफ आईबीसी इज अ 4 पिलर इंस्टीट्यूशनल फ्रेमवर्क. फर्स्ट पिलर जो है एडजुडिकेटिंग एनसीएलटी वाले के बारे में बात की जा रही है. सेकंड पिलर जो रेगुलेटर है इंसॉल्वेंसी बैंक्रप्सी एंड ओवरसाइट इंसॉल्वेंसी प्रोफेशनल. थर्ड पिलर जो है क्लास ऑफ रेगुलेटेड पर्संस बीइंग द इंसॉल्वेंसी प्रोफेशनल्स. फोर्थ पिलर जो है न्यू इंडस्ट्री कॉल्ड इंफॉर्मेशन यूटिलिटी, इलेक्ट्रॉनिकली स्टोर करेगी फैक्ट्स को अबाउट द लैंडर्स एंड द टर्म्स ऑफ लैंडिंग. Then the initiation of corporate insolvency resolution process, the CIRP. CIRP proceedings may be initiated against the corporate debtors by the corporate debtor itself or any of its financial creditor or operational creditor. When the code was enacted, the minimum amount of default to initiate the CIRP against a corporate debtor was rupees 1 lakh. However, the central government has, by notification dated on this, raised the threshold value of minimum amount of default to 1 crore rupee. So detailed procedure होगी for initiation of CIRP by stakeholder is described as follows. When an enterprise default corporate person default on start of process of CIRP, control of enterprise shifts to committee of creditors, assess the proposal either to revive the enterprise or take for liquidation. Decisions are required to be taken in a time-bound manner so that there are greater chances that the enterprise is saved as a going concern and productive resources of economy can be put to best use. So CIRP commences from the date of admission of an application filed for its initiation. So process that entails the moratorium where a calm period is imposed and there is a stay on suit or proceedings against the corporate debtor to give the debtor a better chance to revive and continue as a going concern. So moratorium period here that is 180 days and in limited circumstances. If the COC with a 66% majority decide that the complexity of the case requires more time for a resolution plan to be finalized, a one-time extension of up to 90 days may be granted with prior approval of the NCLT. जो CIRP है वो क्या करेगी shall mandatorily be completed हो जाएगी within a period of 330 days from the insolvency commencement date, including any extension and the time taken in legal proceedings in relation to the resolution process of the corporate debtor. The said amendment has been undertaken to ensure a timely resolution in view of the fact that the 270-day deadline was being breached on account of legal proceeding against the corporate debtor. Provision क्या होगा relating to corporate insolvency resolution process, section 4 to section 32 of the code will be applicable. What will be the provision relating to liquidation process of corporates? Section 33 से 54 of the code will be applicable in case where the enterprise is undergoing liquidation. What will be the provision relating to fast track corporate insolvency resolution process of small corporate person? Section 55 to 58 of insolvency code will be applicable in case where the enterprise is a small company as per the Companies Act 2013 or a startup or an unlisted with the total assets not exceeding rupees 1 crore. What will be the provision क्या होगा relating to the voluntary liquidation? Section 59 of the code will be applicable हो जाएगा to the corporate persons who intend to liquidate itself voluntarily and has not committed any default नहीं किया हो. Then winding up of a company is, in most of the cases, winding up of a company will be through the liquidation process under the code only. Then the bankruptcy of individual and firms, part 3 of Insolvency Code 2016, containing section 78 to 187 deals with insolvency, resolution and bankruptcy for individual and partnership firm. This part shall apply to matters relating to fresh start, insolvency and bankruptcy of individual and partnership firms. Debt Recovery Tribunal will be adjudicating authority and Debt Recovery Appellate Tribunal will be appellate authority for individual and firms. These provisions are not yet effective except for the provision pertaining to personal guarantors to corporate debtors, in which case the NCLT will be adjudicating authority and the NCLAT will be appellate authority if the process is going on, or otherwise DRT or DRAT. What will be the flow of insolvency resolution process for individual? Flow क्या होगा of insolvency resolution process for individual? So process that will be managed by a resolution professional under the direction of adjudicating authority. Insolvency resolution process will be initiated हो जाएगी. Finalize repayment plan with concurrence of debtor and the committee of creditors. Upon consensus on repayment plan, the individual or the firm will get a discharge order. On failure to finalize the repayment plan, the creditor or debtor can file an application for bankruptcy and adjudicating authority may pass the bankruptcy order. The resolution professional only, who is the bankruptcy trustee, will take over the estate of the bankrupt. He will sell or dispose it of and satisfy the payments of creditor to the extent possible. After that, the bankrupt will get a discharge order. The discharge order will be registered with board, that is the IBBI, in a register referred to in section 196 of the code. What will be the provision of this code to override other laws? Section 238 of the code state that the code shall have overriding effect over other laws. For example, section 53 and So 178 है of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016 provide that distribution from sale of asset will be specified in that section, notwithstanding anything to the contrary contained in any other law enacted by the Parliament or any state legislature for the time being in force. Many tax laws, including the GST, also provide for the first charge on assets of the taxable person. However, with the overriding effect of Section 238, distribution from sale of assets in liquidation process or payment as per the resolution plan in CIRP under the code will prevail over the other rules. What will be the extent and commencement of the code? As per section 1 of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, it extends to the whole of India. This code came into enforcement on 28 May 2016. However, the central government appointed different dates for different provision of this code. I think so further we are discussing what we are discussing further, that is the significant amendments. That part. Then comes the significant amendment. तो इसमें further हम क्या डिस्कस करेंगे significant amendment में the code has been first amended by the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Amendment Ordinance 2017 passed on November 23, 17. This ordinance became an act on January 18, 2018. It was known as the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Amendment Act. It was made applicable from November 23, 2017. So second amendment was made by the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Amendment Ordinance 2018 on June 6, 2018. Further, the said ordinance in the form of insolvency and bankruptcy second amendment bill received the assent of the President on the 17th August 2018, and thus the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Second Amendment Act 2018 was enacted. The third amendment here was made by the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Amendment Bill 2019, which received the assent of President on 5th August 2019, and thus the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Amendment Act 19 was promulgated. So fourth amendment here, that the same was made by the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Amendment Ordinance 2019 on December 28, 2019. Further, the said ordinance in the form of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Amendment Bill 2020 received the assent of President on the 13th March 2020, and thus the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Amendment Act 2020 was enacted. Due to the advent of COVID-19 pandemic, so IBC3 was amended by insertion of Section 10A to suspend the initiation of CIRP under Section 7 and 9 and 10 of IBC for any default arising on and after March 25, 2020. The code has undergone significant amendment since its enactment to keep up with the development and demands of the economy for effective implementation of law to remove the bottlenecks. To achieve the desired objective of the code, the President promulgated the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Amendment Ordinance 2021 on 4th April 2021. The Ministry of Law and Justice on 4th August on 12th of August 2021 enacted the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code Amendment Act 2021 with effect from 4th day of April 2021. The amendment was made with an intent to provide an efficient alternative insolvency and resolution framework for person classified as micro, small, and medium enterprise MSMEs under the code for ensuring quicker, cost effective, and value maximizing outcome for all the stakeholder in a manner which is least disruptive to the continuity of MSME's business and which preserves job. By this amendment, the provision related to this double PIRP and MSMEs was introduced. It provides an efficient alternative insolvency resolution framework for corporate person classified as MSMEs for timely, efficient, and cost-effective resolution of distress, thereby ensuring positive signal to that market, employment preservation, ease of doing business, and preservation of enterprise.